back to my channel. In today's video, we are doing something that I have never done before, at least not that I can recall, and that is some emboss resist. So I'm going to be using some embossing to do a resist on a background. Just a different technique and a different way to use the supplies that I have in a way that I don't believe I've ever used them before. So the first things first, here I have an Altenew stamp set. This is the Vintage Flowers, I believe. Yes, Vintage Flowers. And here I have a print off from their website. I don't know if when I purchased the stamp set, if they didn't have their nice little trifold inserts, or if I was just dumb and not thinking and threw it away. But regardless, I went to their website, typed in that particular stamp set, and was able to print this off. And so this is the layering guide for it. And I just printed it in color and then cut it out so I could fit it behind there. So there are two different big, larger florals on here. I'm going to use the one that only has 3 layers, but there is one of a similar size that has 4 layers. But because of the particular technique we're doing today, I didn't want to fool with 4 layers, so I stuck with the top rows that has 3. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this larger image here, and this is the one that has the most space. So this is kind of the opposite of when you're doing die cut layering. So when you do stamp layering, you start with the lightest color and you build on top of that. When you do die cut layering, you actually do the opposite. So the one that has the most space is usually your darkest color, and then you layer progressively lighter colors on top. So that's just kind of opposites and something that I had to learn. So the first thing I did is I just took that larger image out, and I am using my Misty here, which is very helpful. This is Pink Pearl ink from Altenew, and I've had this ink pad for a very long time. It is starting to dry out, so in order to get a crisp impression, I had to stamp it 3 times. If you had an ink pad that was a little more juicy, you probably wouldn't have to stamp it this many times, and this ink does even out as you go. But I did have to do that. And all I did was take that most covered area, the one that has the most inking space, and just made essentially my own pattern paper background. I made sure that I had images that went off of the edge. That gives you a more cohesive look and does make it look like you cut that out of a piece of pattern paper and instead of just kind of doing it weird, for lack of better words. So after I did that, I took my Misty yet again, and I grabbed that a second layer. And in this one, I'm doing that in Coral Bliss. And I had to use that insert that I printed out from Altenew's website to help me figure out how to line things up. But it wasn't that hard. Once I found a point that was a good reference for me, sometimes in stamp sets, the reference points that they pick don't really help me. And sometimes they are very helpful. But in this one, there was a little, sorry, my head gets in the way. I'm trying to make sure I've got things lined up well. For this one, there's like a V cut in there. And that was the point that I used to help myself line things up. And then I used another point on the stamp to help me line things up. But always refer to those reference guides. Even if you have to print it off from their website, or if they don't happen to have it, which I think they usually do for all of their stamp sets now, you can always go to their website or type in that particular stamp set on YouTube or on Pinterest and find a video of someone actually using it. Typically someone from like an Altenew design team will have a video using it when it first came out, and that may be very beneficial for you in helping line things up. Another option is to take a piece of acetate and help you, stamp the image on the acetate and then line that up on an image that you are trying to layer it on top of, and see if that helps you. So now I have stamped all of those in the Coral Bliss and the Pink Pearl, and I'm now to Heartbeat. This is the darkest color. Like I said, this flower had 3 layers. The other one had 4. And I'm just going to go do the same exact thing. This ink pad was a little more juicy, and this has the least amount of area, so this is going to be my darkest color here. And I'm going to go through and stamp all of these all over again. This one was a little trickier for me to line up. That second layer wasn't as bad, except for when I had cut off my biggest reference point in my stamping, but I was able to figure it out. And if you don't get these lined up exactly, it's okay. Like, it's not the end of the world. This is a handmade card. People are just going to be grateful that you thought of them. They're not going to sit there and be like, well, this one didn't line up like this one did. And if they do that, then you don't need to send them cards anyway. So I'm going to finish stamping all of this third layer, and then this background will be done as far as the layering goes. So now all of those layers are done, and what I've done is I've taken that first stamp that we stamped everything in pink pearl, and I am using clear embossing ink, so this is VERSAMARK ink, and I am going to stamp over these entire images with my VERSAMARK ink. And then I'm going to sprinkle on some Ranger embossing powder in holographic is the color for this. And I'm going to stamp that out and then sprinkle on the embossing powder. And I'm going to go through and do some that are not next to one another just in case I bump it. So I'm trying to kind of spread them out and stamp one with the VERSAMARK ink, line it up with the image before, the lightest pink pearl layer before, sprinkle on my embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat set. I'll heat set 3 or 4 at a time, and then I will repeat that for the remaining ones. So all we're doing is, you need to treat this with your anti-static powder tool, which I have forgot to do through this entire card. So do as I say, not as I do, and be sure you treat all of these with your anti-static powder before you go to heat set them. So all I'm going to do is take that most covered area, so the one that we did in the lightest color, stamp that in VERSAMARK ink, sprinkle over my embossing powder and holographic, and then heat set. And we will do that until the entire panel is covered. I noticed when I was heat setting it that I missed some areas. So I have a VERSAMARKER pen here, VERSAMARK pen, and it has a brush nib and a bullet nib. And this is the exact same ink that is on your VERSAMARK ink pad, it's just in a pen form. And I'm going to go over the areas that I missed with this VERSAMARK pen. You use it just like a pen, nothing different about it, and then sprinkle on more of that embossing powder and heat set that in the areas that I missed. One of the things that as I was doing this and I was looking at this holographic embossing powder, which is beautiful, however, it's got a rougher finish to it. It's not like smooth like most embossing powders because of the glitter in it. And so one of the things that I wish I would have done, and I thought about doing, but I was like, no, it'll be all right, is I wish I would have went back over this with clear. I wish I would have heat set it again with clear embossing powder. So either put on your holographic, I would recommend putting on your holographic first, your holographic heat embossing powder first, and then going back over with clear. I would recommend doing that because when I go to this next step, which is essentially coloring in the background and the actual technique of today, you'll see in the final setup that it's kind of splotchy. And I think if I would have gone back over it with clear, just clear embossing powder, no, not the holographic again, just clear, I think I would have alleviated that problem. I don't think that would have happened. So we're just going to find the areas that we missed with our initial stamping and the holographic powder and heat set those, and then we will be done. So I bought this kind of on a whim. I saw, what's her name? Cards and Coffee Time? I think that's her channel. She bought this, and it's a little vacuum. And I used it to kind of scoop up and vacuum up the little bits of glitter that were remaining from my embossing powder. Then I have a little Swiffer cloth here. I'm getting up the rest and kind of brushing that off of the card base, or off of my little heat embossed panel here. So at this point, this is where I would recommend going back over with the clear. So now for the actual emboss resist. So I have some, this is Royal ink from Simon Says Stamp. This is their Positively Saturated line. And I started out with my blending brush here. I eventually go direct to paper. And all I'm doing is applying ink all over this entire image. I'm not worried about the flowers because we have that embossing powder over them. Now, as I'm applying it, my arm's getting tired. And so I eventually give up the whole blending brush, and I just eventually pounce my ink pad gently over the entirety of my panel just to make sure I've got like good solid coverage. So here, this is my ink pad direct to paper. I recommend only doing this kind of technique if you have re-inkers. And I did get some glitter on that ink pad, but it's not going to affect it. And in fact, as I use it, I can always kind of brush that off. So now if you look, those flowers look pretty messed up, but don't worry, don't freak out. We're going to get those colors to come back on those flowers. I used a piece of scrap paper just so I would have quicker cleanup. So here what I've done is I've taken a paper towel and I spritzed it with some just clean, clear water. And now I'm going over those flowers, just trying to get the ink that is sitting on top of them off. So I think first I did it with a dry paper towel, and then now I'm going to bring in water, and that's really going to help bring the color back into focus. As you can see on this first flower, like look at that difference, and it almost makes those flowers look like they're glowing. Isn't that beautiful? Now it's at this point that I'm looking and I'm like, okay, that one turned out pretty good, but this one, it's splotchy. So where there was gaps between like the clear embossing and the glitter, there's like splotches on my flower that are dark blue. And I don't like that. And that's where I think that if I would have gone back over this entire panel with clear after I did the holographic, I would not have had this problem. So I'm going to go through and again spray a clean part of my paper towel and wipe over these flowers and try to bring some of that color back. And I'm going to do that on all of these flowers. So that is the entire panel. You can tell that on a couple of those flowers, it was really bad. Kind of that flower right by my thumb, really bad. So again, do your clear glitter and then do your just clear embossing powder over the top. So as far as my sentiment goes, I have this Simon Says Stamp Elegantly Modern Sentiments, and I'm going to use the thanks from here. And then I'm showing you this particular die set. I don't actually use that on this card. What I did is I placed one of the sentiments from that stamp set into my Mini Misty, and I'm going to stamp that multiple times with VERSAMARK ink, and then sprinkle over gold embossing powder from Ranger and heat set that. And I'm going to heat set that a few times. So I've heat set it once, and now I'm placing it back in my Misty. I didn't move my stamp at all, and I'm placing my paper back in the exact same spot. And I'm going to repeat this process again. I'm going to put on my anti-static powder because I remembered it's Christmas Miracle. And then I'm going to stamp it once again with that VERSAMARK ink and then sprinkle over the exact same gold embossing powder. And what this does is the more layers you apply, it almost gives this image a, I mean, the gold gives it that metallic feel, but it almost makes it look like it has more dimension to it. I can't describe it. I can't put into words, but it has just a much smoother, beveled, raised image to it. It's just extra pretty. So now what I've done is use the coordinating die to die cut that sentiment out, and then we are almost ready to put this card together. Ignore those die cuts in the top right. I decided not to use those. There was a change of plans. So all I've done is die cut out that sentiment multiple times and layer it together, and I'm just going to put something somewhat heavy on top just to make sure it's getting good adhesion. I did use liquid glue to do this, to stick these together this time, just because I wanted a little bit of wiggle room, particularly with kind of those thinner swirly bits. So I'm showing you this boss. I don't actually use that on today's card. Like I said, this card took kind of a change of route. Anyway, so my daughter actually sneezed on this. And so there were some like water splots. I know that's super gross, but in order to kind of play off of those and make them look purposeful, that Simon Says Stamp ink is reactive with water, and so I did just spritz some water over the top of it just to add some more water droplets. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this down a little bit. So this right now is 5x7, and there's my little card base right there that's a 5x7 card base, and I'm going to trim this down a little bit. And I end up trimming it down to where it is, I think I trim 3/4 of an inch off of each side. So it's like 4 1/4 by 6 1/4, something like that. Just because I wanted a little bit of a wider border around my card. I took some scraps of fun foam and snipped those off to fit behind this emboss resist panel, and then I'm going to glue that down onto my card base using that same liquid glue. Then I'm going to take that same liquid glue and trying to cover up those ones that just didn't turn out all that great, and distract from them as best I can. That is where I'm going to place my sentiment. So initially this card was going to be portrait, but trying to cover up those flowers, it worked better if it was a landscape, and I was able to place the sentiment right there. So the last little bit that I'm going to do is some pearls from my stash. So I have some white pearls, just trying to play off of the white background of the sentiment and the card base. I have them in 2 different sizes. One of them is smaller, one of them is a little bit bigger, and I'm going to use that same liquid glue and a little jewel picker tool to glue those down, and then this card will be complete. I will pair it with a navy kind of envelope, and then this card is complete. So I appreciate you spending time with me today. I hope that you give this a try. It is a fun technique, and I learned a lot, and it will probably be a technique that I try again just to see if I can get better at it, and using the things that I kind of learned from this video. So that is all. I hope you have fun and you are inspired, and we'll see you next time. Bye.